because the serial killer who's kind of hung over the whole series for, you know, all these years is finally going to come on screen. It's interesting, and I have to, it's a challenge because he's been deliberately backgrounded the entire time on purpose. This is Ellery's story. She's the surviving victim. And the whole series has kind of been about what it's like for her to live in the shadow of this very famous serial killer. I mean, he's based on Ted Bundy. And how ubiquitous is Ted Bundy? I was watching a Ted Bundy thing the other night, and when it finished, it ended, and on the television was another Ted Bundy, like a completely separate thing. So we keep telling and retelling his story. And every time we do, we have to haul out all of the ordinary people who are caught up in it. And so as a result, they never get to move on. He's been dead now for decades. And we're still like, okay, Carol, come on, time to tell your story. And one of them, the most recent one I watched is actually a documentary interviewing a lot of the women who were around Ted Bundy. It was focused primarily on the woman, Elizabeth Kendall, who was his fiance, and her daughter, who lived with Bundy as a family unit at the time of the murders. And at the end, they're like, okay, we hope now we can never talk about him again. Like it's been 40 years, can we be done? And I'm not sure that America will ever let them be done. Mm-hmm. We just keep retelling this story. So in my books, I've kind of subverted that. And the Ted Bundy guy he's locked up, he's on death row, there's nothing he can do. And it's really about this woman and her struggle to reclaim her own identity in the wake of all of this that happened. But now he's on screen again, or at last, and I have to think about what I want to say when I bring him out. And of course, what happens with the plot. So there's a lot of pieces to figure out.
He doesn't escape, does he? Or would that be telling?
You want me to give away the story, Sarah?
You're not going to give away the story, but let's talk about the new book that's out.
Yeah, that's this one. All the Best Lies. That's number 3.
Mm-hmm. So number 3 is out, number 4 is done, and You're working on number 5.
That is the sequence of events, yes.
Do you want to read a little bit from number 3?
Sure.
Or tell us something about it.
One, because I'm dyslexic in the oral to written pathway. And 2, because my scenes tend to be longish. Mm-hmm. But I've picked one. This is part way through. Book 3 is about Reed, actually, the FBI agent who rescued Ellery all those years ago, and his search to find out what happened to his mother, who was murdered when he was a baby, only a few months old. Somebody brutally stabbed her to death in Las Vegas, and it's never been solved. So in this scene, Reed and Ellery are interviewing the guy who was the primary suspect at the time. They walked the short path to the front door, and Reed rang the bell. Apart from them, the street was deserted and silent. Ellery heard someone moving around on the other side of the door, and eventually it parted about 3 inches and an old man's face peered out at them. Yeah? Mr. Thorndyke, Reed ventured. The crack did not widen. Who's asking? Reed Markham, he replied, and he pulled out his FBI credentials. I'd like to talk to you about Camilla Flores, if I may. That's his mom. Don't know her. He started to close the door, but Reed blocked it with his foot. She was murdered, stabbed to death in her apartment 44 years ago, right before she could testify against you in open court. Oh, her. Yeah, she's dead. Been that way a long time now. What do you care anyway? Ain't you government people got something better to do, like terrorism? I seen on the TV just today how we got sleeper cells of them Arabs living right here in Nevada. They could be right next door for all I know. Why don't you knock over there? He moved to shut the door again, but Reed pushed back and widened the gap. Ellery caught the stench of beer and cigarettes flowing from the inside. Give us 15 minutes, Reed said. If you can convince me that Camilla Flores' murder is old news, we won't come back and bother you again. You have a warrant? I don't got to talk to you without a warrant. You just got done telling me there's no case, Reed said reasonably. Why would I need a warrant? Thorndyke swayed and scowled as though he knew there was a trick in the logic somewhere, but he couldn't quite place it. 15 minutes, he groused, backing up so they could enter. That's all you get. Judge Judy comes on at 10, and I love that bitch. She doesn't take shit from anyone. Ellery stepped over the threshold and saw Thorndyke had now lost almost all his hair, leaving just a gray fringe around his ears. His nose had grown longer and taken on a reddish color, while his cheeks caved in. The stubble remained, as did the curl of chest hair, which peeked out from under his white muscle shirt. In his weakened state, Thorndyke didn't seem a threat to anyone. He even used a walker. He leaned heavily on it as he led them back to the living room, where, as advertised, he had a morning court show playing at full volume. He grabbed the remote and stabbed angrily at it to silence the television before collapsing, like a inflating balloon, into a nearby stuffed recliner. Picked up a cigarette and tapped the lengthening ash into the tray. Tick, tick, he reminded them. You want to talk? Then talk. Reed and Ellery sat on an overstuffed floral sofa. Camilla Flores, Reed began, but Thorndyke cut them off with a wave of his hand. The cops have been trying to pin that bitch's murder on me for decades. It never stuck. You know why? Because I didn't do it. She was going to testify against you, Reed reminded him. Excuse me, but that never happened. Yeah, that Thorndyke said before taking a drag on his cigarette. Shame about that. Tell me about the afternoon she was killed, Reed said. Thorndyke looked him over with dead eyes. I don't know. I wasn't there. You must have heard about it. Sure, everyone heard about it. The story was some guy broke into her place, maybe to steal her piddly shit. But she turned out not to be home. She turned out to be home and caught him piling up her stuff, so he gutted her like a fish. He made a slicing motion to underscore his point, and Ellery's stomach tightened. Something about the way his face brightened with the pantomime reminded her of Coben and Willett. Excuse me. And she remembered that this dissembling wretch of a man had no doubt killed someone, even if he happened to be innocent of the Flores murder. Where were you when all this was going on? Reed asked. Home with Ma, he replied coolly, blowing out smoke. She wasn't feeling so good, so I brought her some groceries. Cooked her an early supper. What'd you make? Fried sausage and potatoes, her favorite. He added a cheeky smile after this answer, like he'd had it ready in his back pocket. I stayed and watched her programs with her while she ate it. So you see, I couldn't have done it. My ma, she swore on the Holy Bible to the cops that I was with her when that bitch got popped. And of course your mother would never lie for you, Reed said. And Thorndyke replied with a wide smile that showed off a row of yellow teeth. Of course she would have. Wouldn't your mama take a bullet for you if it came to that? He coughed and then grinned at his own remark. Maybe she wouldn't. Maybe you cops all have tight-ass pussy mamas who don't care about you. But it don't make no difference, not after all this time. Ma's been gone 20 years now. You want to dig her up and ask her again? I don't think that will be necessary, Reed replied. Ellery could feel the window closing. What about Giselle Hardiman, she blurted out, and both Reed and Thorndyke turned to look at her. Thorndyke puffed away on his cigarette for a moment. Who? He asked pointedly, and Ellery could tell it was for show. He knew the Hardiman name right away. He just wanted to work her for the information. She practically rolled up her sleeves, relishing the job. I've got your number now, you little creep, she thought. Forget his grand proclamations about how they had to be leaving in 15 minutes. This man would let them sit there and grill him all day. Hell, he'd probably try to block the door if they left too soon. He'd been rotting in that recliner so long it had taken on his shape. And then along came two investigators to ask him about the time when he had been big and bad enough to murder someone. No TV program was ever going to give him that. I'm sorry, Ellery said as she leaned forward. Are you hard of hearing? I can speak up if you need. I heard you the first time, Thorndyke snarled in return. Hardiman, right? I just don't know the name. Giselle Hardiman, Ellery repeated for him. She was another young woman, killed the same year before Camilla Flores. She was also, how did you put it? Gutted like a fish. Thorndyke's chuckle devolved into a wheeze. He reached for an inhaler and sucked on that for a couple of breaths. Giselle, okay, yeah, I remember her now. Working girl, and she could work it. Pretty little bow tie mouth, big tits. So you were a client. Honey, I don't pay for it. Yeah, that's what they all say, Ellery replied, sounding bored. But the working girls, the smart ones, like you say, they don't just give it away. Maybe you don't pay in cash, but you pay. Am I right? He laughed and wheezed again. I like this one, he told Reed, pointing at Ellery. She's got spunk. Nice tits, too. Back in my day, the cop shop was always full of dicks. We didn't get anything near this tasty. Back to Giselle, Ellery said. Thorndyke licked his lips. Like I said, tasty. Why are you asking me about her? You think I killed that one too? Did you? Ellery asked, just to stroke his ego a little. Fuck no, I got no beef with Giselle. Any idea who did? Thorndyke waved both hands in their direction. What do I care? Maybe the person who killed Giselle also killed Camilla Flores. And if that person isn't you, it means you're off the hook. I look like I'm on some sort of hook to you? You caps got jack shit on me. Ellery waited a moment and then slapped her hands on her knees. I guess you're right, she said, rising from the sofa. Reed glanced up in surprise and scrambled to follow her lead. We should be moving along then, leaving you to your daytime television. Wait just a damn second. Ellery turned around, showing impatience. What is it, Mr. Thorndyke? We don't have all day. We have other leads to investigate, you know. We can't be wasting time with dead ends. Anger flared in his cheeks. Hey, honey, you rang my bell, remember? And what a bore that turned out to be. She practically yawned as she said it. We should go. Wait, just wait. She could see his mind spinning. You guys are FBI, you said. She let Reed take that one. That's right. What are the feds doing with a 40-year-old case? Reed and Ellery exchanged a glance. We have some new information that's taken the case in a different direction, Reed answered carefully. What new information? I'm afraid I can't say. It's corrupt cops, isn't it? It's gotta be. Those cocksuckers think they can get away with anything. What makes you say that? Reed said. She said it. She brought up Giselle Hardiman. What about her? Come off it, man. I know what was going down with her. We all knew the score. What cops would bust your balls and which would look the other way if you made it worth their while. Giselle knew it better than anyone. You're saying Giselle bought off police officers. Thorndyke gasped and coughed with the humor of it all. Yeah, she bought him off all right, with her pussy. She'd give it up anytime, anywhere for the boys in blue. Can you prove that? Reed asked quickly. Thorndyke looked offended. What, do you think I got pictures or something? What sort of sick fuck do you think I am? I don't gotta prove it. We all knew it. Just no one wants to talk about it, especially after Giselle got whacked. I'll stop there.
Whoa.
Yeah, Thorndyke's fun.
Thorndyke is fun.
Yeah. So are Reed and Ellery. They're fun characters to write.
So how did you get in bed with telling Ellery's story? What attracted you to that character?
So Ellery is based very loosely on Carol Durant, who I mentioned earlier from the Ted Bundy story. She was shopping at a Utah mall. She was 18 when Bundy, posing as a police officer, approached her and said, you know, your car's been broken into. You need to come with me to the station to make a statement. And so she went with him. But, you know, she noticed that he was driving a VW Bug, not a cop car. He smelled like alcohol and they were driving away from the police station. So she said, pull over and let me out. And he pulled over, but he didn't let her out. Instead, he tried to slap his handcuffs on her. But in the struggle, he missed and he got both cuffs on the same wrist. And Carol was able to escape. So Carol became the beginning of Bundy's end because she lived. That night, he went and killed another young woman somewhere else. So Carol lived and somebody else died. But Carol was the first person who could put all the pieces together. His name was Ted. He was abducting women. He was posing as various things to try and lure them into his car. This is where he was. He was in Seattle. He was in Colorado. He was in Utah. And she put him into the system so that the other people who were looking for this murderer of young women were like, okay, this is the guy. So she's a pivotal player in the Ted Bundy story, which means every time it gets told, there's somebody, either Carol has to be there telling it herself or there's somebody assigned to be her. Like imagine, you know, turning on the TV and seeing somebody being you, telling your story. Today, this is more than 40 years ago that this happened. Today, Carol still gets 15 messages a day about Ted Bundy.
Oh, golly.
He follows her around like a ghost. He's been dead for decades, but for Carol, he's never, ever going away. And Reed is loosely based on Bob Keppel, who is the homicide detective in Seattle who caught the Ted Bundy case when it was just some missing young women. They figured that they probably met a bad end, which is why they had a homicide detective working it. He'd been on the job 1 week and he got assigned to Ted Bundy. Completely changed the trajectory of his career. He ended up hunting Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, as well. It became something of a specialist in serial murder, but he didn't set out to do that. It happened to him. And there are all of these people that are around Ted Bundy, where he happened to them and he changed their lives, mostly for ill. Bob Keppel's sort of the one where there's possibly like some silver lining, because it really, launched his career and opened up doors to him. But for the most part, it's just all these people who survived him or, didn't. But of course, the dead women tell no tales. But that's where we did
the living woman, Ellery, must have this tremendous survival guilt.
Yes. And you can see that in Carol's interviews too. She lived, and he literally just like drove up the highway and took another young woman from a school play, basically. And so that woman died instead of Carol.
She must be haunted by that woman.
And it's really hard. Yeah. Why? I mean, it's random, it's not that like Carol deserved to live and this other woman didn't. It's just, that's how it went. And one of the things that's interesting about these two characters and bringing them together is, so Ellery was 14 when Reed rescued her. And that happens off screen before the books. It's not written about in any of the books. The action picks up 14 years later when Ellery thinks that someone has figured out who she is and there's a copycat at work. No one will believe her. And so she calls up the one guy she knows will believe her, and that's the one who rescued her when she was a kid. And Reed has, he wrote a best-selling book about it. He's always told himself that he's this big hero. And in reuniting, he gets to see like whether that's really true. So they're also the only two people who know the truth of this story, really. It gets retold all the time in books and TV and movie, but they were there. And so they are witnesses, basically, one to the other about what the truth of the story is.
Yeah, they lived it and now they have to live it again.
Yeah, this is sort of one of the issues, is whether it ever really goes away. And how do you move forward, and how, especially if you're young, like Ellery was, and you haven't really formed an identity yet, how do you become who you're supposed to be if no one will ever see you as anything other than this girl who got away?
Why did you decide to make Ellery much younger than Carol was?
She's only a few years younger.
Carol was 18, right?
Yep, Carol was 18 and Ellery was 14 at the time. Part of it is, again, for this identity issue. And also, Coben is more opportunistic than Bundy was in a way. Bundy's kills vary. And so part of it, another thread running through the series, is this issue of vulnerability. Because Reed has a 6-year-old daughter, she's 6 at the start of the series, that he shares with his ex-wife. And they clash a lot. And one of the things that they clash about is Reed's job and how it takes him away, and what's better for Tula, the daughter, than to have like a safe family that she, live with the mom all the time. And book 4, she wants to take her away and have her live across the country from Reed. And Reed basically maintains that you cannot protect people from every bad thing that's ever going to happen to them. And what you can do is build up resources around them so that when the bad thing, it lessens the likelihood of the bad thing. And it means that when the bad thing happens, even if that's not a serial murderer, that there are people who will help you. Because Ellery also, her older brother was dying of cancer at the time, which is one of the reasons she was out on the streets on the eve of her birthday by herself at age 14. The father had left the family. The mother was tending to the older brother, who was very, very ill. And so Ellery was vulnerable. And the family basically didn't have the resources to protect her at the time, and then afterwards help her really figure out how to deal with all of this. So she was kind of left alone to deal with it. And so that's one of the reasons that she was 14.
Mm-hmm. So she gets involved in this vortex of irrationality and sheer evil and never really gets to begin.
Yep. Yeah.
So
The thing is
she's trying.
she escaped.
She's trying. Yeah.
And forge her own path. And so book 5 is Coben, the serial killer, who's the Bundy-like character in my books, says that he will basically give up more bodies, the missing women who've never been found, if Reed will bring him Ellery, whom he's never seen since she was plucked from his closet.
Oh.
So this gets to like, what does Ellery owe to this story? What does she owe to other victims, if anything? Mm-hmm. How much does the serial killer still get to control the narrative? And did he kill these other women? Can Ellery and Reed figure out what happened to them and bring them home?
Wow, what a thing to put her through.
Yeah, well, we torture the ones we love, right?
Yes, we do. Garrett and Heather, do you have some questions for Joanna? Or Marsha?
Sure.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi, Heather.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. So thank you first of all for doing this. I am in Brooklyn actually, so I have been reading your books for a long time, but I haven't been able to make it to a signing, so this is really fun.
Oh, it's so good to see you.
Yeah. So I will say, I work at Simon & Schuster now, so I'm in publishing, and I used to be at Macmillan. So I have been following your books since they first acquired them. So it's very exciting. Yeah. And I'm a big X-Files fan. And you promised that you might talk about your favorite X-Files episode. So I guess I had 2 questions. One is just kind of, what is your favorite X-Files episode? And 2, I know that you're a fellow fan, and Ellery and Reed's story definitely does remind me a little bit of Mulder and Scully and their dynamic, which is why I love them so much. And I guess I'm wondering if this is, if you've kind of thought about the ending for the books without giving anything away, and whether it might be a way to show Chris Carter that you actually can maybe resolve some sexual tension without destroying the relationship.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think definitely there have been other authors who've shown that you can. He's just not listening. I don't know that he would ever listen to anything that came out of a woman's mouth.
That's true.
Sadly. Okay, so my favorite X-Files episode is Jose Chung's From Outer Space.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
I have lots of them that I really love. Some that I don't love as much now as I did when I was younger and maybe less aware of some of the issues with the boys of 10, 13. I mean, the number of times rape comes up as like a thing that's good on the X-Files is truly alarming. Like, well, is it really so bad? Like, in the end, she gets the baby out of it that she wanted.
And then he didn't stop in season 11. If anything, he just made it worse in season 11.
He just keeps cranking away, right? More rape. Yay! I know. Just mind-blowing. There are no women in the writer's room for the X-Files, and it has really shown. But what I love, I remember very clearly watching Jose Chung's From Outer Space for the first time, which was late because I didn't join the X-Files. In fact, I actively resisted the X-Files for like 6 years, and I didn't enjoy it until like season 6. And I actually started watching because I found the fanfic, the writing that the fans did. And I was amazed at the quality of the stories that people were giving away for free. And oh my goodness, I knew who the characters were, like enough to be able to follow the stories. And I was like, oh, well, I want to join this community, but that means I have to watch the show. So I'll start watching. So I like completely backwards, where I was like, oh, I want to play in this sandbox, but you gotta like watch Mulder and Scully to get in. So
That's great. That's
so
fun.
you know, I'm watching the show, and I stopped. This is how long ago it was, and how old. I stopped the videotape on the VCR. And I told my roommate at the time, I'm like, I'm watching one of the most amazing hours of television ever. I think it's hilarious, but I think I really respond to this idea of, and it's one of the reasons I write crime fiction, is what is truth? You know, like everybody has their own version of events, and how do you get to what actually is the truth? And how one person's truth can be so different from another's, and the way it continues the narrative, like twists again and subverts again. I think it's brilliant. Plus the send up of Mulder and Scully and the show itself, and the way it's self-referential to other Darren Morgan episodes. I just think it's like endlessly clever.
Yeah.
So I just think it's really awesome.
That's so funny, because I never, so I'm not a big fan of that episode, and I'll have to go back and try it again. I couldn't exactly tell you why. I'll have to try it again.
I think it's very intellectual and heart. So if you're looking for heart, you're not going to see it there.
Yeah, maybe that's the one. I can't remember the name of my favorite episode. It maybe it's Irresistible. It's one of the ones that is more of a grounded kind of serial killer case. Yeah. But honestly, it depends on the day you ask me. I will give you a different answer. So I wouldn't quote myself on that. But I love the case episodes more than the mythology, which just kind of fell apart.
Well, that went off the rails. So
yeah. So.
Yeah. I mean, I've been introducing my daughter to the show for the first time while we're all in quarantine, and you know, she's 10, so we're sticking mainly to the episodes, and she's enjoying them. She really likes Just Duet with the genie, who will grant you your 3 wishes, literally.
Yeah, that's such a good one. I love that one.
I really enjoyed that one. But yeah, I mean, I like other episodes for other reasons, but that one, it contains so many ideas that are really exciting to me.
Yeah.
So that's why I like it. As for Reed and Ellery and whether they are Mulder and Scully, I mean, so this was originally an X-Files fanfic that I wrote 20 years ago.
Whoa.
I think I have read it or part of it. And so what I thought was really interesting is that you did, I mean, obviously the whole thing has been reworked. And so I just found that interesting. This might be getting a little bit too in the weeds for some of the other people on the call, but I thought it was really interesting because Ellery was not Scully. Ellery was an original character always.
Yep.
But then I thought it was so interesting how the Ellery in the final product, you know, just the dynamic of her and Reed reminds me a little bit of Mulder and Scully. But I know that she's always been an original character. So I just kind of found that fascinating, that it was almost like kind of melding them a little bit together, some of their qualities. So I really enjoy that.
Well, I really love male-female crime-solving teams. That's always been my kink, you know?
Me too. I think that has to be it, yeah.
Yeah. You know, so yes, they're both smart like Mulder and Scully. They're both in law enforcement like Mulder and Scully. So there are definitely some similarities there. But yeah, when I had to DX the story and take Mulder and Scully out of it, I had to decide, like, who was I putting in? I mean, obviously Ellery, who was Eleanor in the original story, I had to decide what I was going to do with her to change her so that she could carry a series.
Yeah, right.
A one-off, because she ends up in jail like after the original story, and she can't be in jail if she's going to carry a series.
Right.
So there's definitely like aspects of her that had to grow and change and be fleshed out for her to be able to do that. And then I had to decide, like, who was going to be the Mulder character and what kind of background was I going to give him. so that he could carry a series. And that kept me from doing it. Like, so it was, if I wrote that in 2000, I took my first stab in 2003, I guess, at DXing it. I got about 8 chapters in. I was working at it, workshopping it at Grub Street. And I knew I was onto something because my instructor at Grub Street handed back the chapters and she says, "This reads like it's a real book."
Wow.
And then at the end, she pulled me aside. I was in the intermediate class and she's like, "You belong in the professional class that you have to audition to get in or get one of them to like," but I did not have the money for like the pro level class. And then I met my husband, and we got married and moved, and I moved jobs and I had a kid, and like I just didn't have the bandwidth to take this on. And then, there was this contest that St. Martin's runs about like submit your manuscript that's unpublished, and see if they'll publish it. And I did not expect to win because all of the manuscripts that they published until that time were very different. They tend to be historical, more cozy, more quirky. Mine, as my mom called it, was your body parts novel. The serial killer cuts off people's hands. And my mother wouldn't even read it. She's like, "Oh, that's gross and terrible and ew." So I like, all right, I will use this to sit down and do the work and finish it. And I started over again, and I wrote it in like 2 months.
Wow.
Sent it off and then waited. And then I got the call that said, you won. And this is for the funny part. The publisher said, "Where did you come from?"
That sounds about right. Yeah.
And I was like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "Well, how did you learn to write like this?" And I said, "X-Files fanfic." Yeah.
I love people in publishing because they continue to be, even years after everything with 50 Shades and everything, they continue to be shocked that the community turns out such great writers. That's really funny. Well, and the timing is perfect, right? Because you kind of, the book came out like right around when true crime was exploding again. So I feel like it was kind of the perfect tone for what people were in the mood for at the time.
Yeah, it did surprisingly well. I think everybody was really surprised because it's not groundbreaking. Like I'm not reinventing the wheel or whatever. I'm not telling a story that's never been told. But I think Reed and Ellery are likable people. They make mistakes, but they're both good, decent people at heart. And I think that goes a long way. Like people connect, like readers seem to connect to that. So that's good. But where the series is going, there's always that question, right? Of how many books. I'm under contract through 5. So I'm writing 5 now. And like, how do I write 5? Do I write 5 as though there's going to be a 6th or a 7th or an 8th or whatever? Or do I write it as though it is the end? And because basically I will have to have written that book before the publisher is likely to make a decision.
Right. Oh no.
Which like,
yeah.
If you work in publishing, you know how this works.
I do know. Yeah.
I have to turn that book in this year, and it's not going to be published till 2022.
Right.
And so I will have to basically have it in the vault before we know. I mean, and you can see some of that with All the Best Lies. It's another one where at that point, it was the last book under contract. And
so good. You gave us so much good stuff in here.
Well, so it was designed to you could walk away and never see Reed and Ellery again and be okay with it.
Right.
Unlike book 2, which ends with a cliffhanger.
Right.
So book 4 is another, basically I have to walk some of that back. Like, it's a good place, yay, running off into the sunset, literally almost. And now it's like, oops, nope, sorry.
Back to the torture, okay.
Yeah, back to the torture. But book 5 would be another potential exit from the series. So I have to keep that in mind when I'm writing it, because it might also not be an exit to the series. And it's the tricky part about when writing becomes a business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yet I think I don't want to take up all of the time, so
Okay, it's not like
I'll
there's
try to-
three times.
but still, it does remind me of how, again, back to X-Files, they had some of their most creative ideas under the pressure like that. So I feel like it is kind of interesting for you as a writer probably, but definitely us as a fan to have places where, you know, we do have a moment of respite. We know that they're going to be okay, but then you do something else. There's a new twist that kind of just ratchets up the tension again. So I actually think I kind of like that the business kind of forces you to do that, I guess, because I'm so happy with it as a trilogy. But I'm also so happy that there's going to be a fourth book. And then, you know, the fact that it can kind of expand organically that way, I think is so interesting.
Yeah. Well, the fun part about book 4 for me is giving characters more screen time we haven't seen much of. So like Ellery's teenage half-sister runs away from home and ends up on her doorstep.
Interesting.
Ellery's completely not prepared to deal with a 16-year-old in the middle of an ongoing investigation and all this other stuff. Reed is visiting. He's supposed to be on vacation, and he's got Tula with him. So Ellery and his daughter are interacting for the first time.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
So, like, you know, giving characters. Oh, and Ellery has a new partner, Dory Bennett, and I like her a lot.
Interesting.
So, yes. So it's new characters, some characters that have shown up before in bits and pieces who get more airtime. So book 4 is fun in that regard. And then it's like, okay, so book 5 is like, okay, well, sorry, some of these characters have to go now to make room for new characters in this new story. It's always a bit of a puzzle to solve, like who gets to be in this scene, you know, and who gets to be in this book or not. And, you know, the dog obviously has where can I work in more bump?
Her trusty canine. Yeah. Well, another question I had was if you could talk a little bit about the other, is it a new series that you're starting or just a standalone book or?
Well, I wrote it as a standalone, but the publisher wants it as a series. So I have to.
That's a good problem to have.
Yeah, it's a great problem to have, but it is a riddle to solve. But yeah, it's called Gone for Good, and it should come out summer, I think, 2020. It doesn't have or 2021 rather. It doesn't have a pub date yet, but I believe that's what we're targeting. It's done. It's been done for a while, a couple of years now. Yeah, it's nice that it's done. Have something finished in the can.
Yeah. That's always the best feeling, is in between when you finished it and when it comes out.
Oh, I know. Before the reviews start coming
some peace. Yeah.
What is this dreck? Yeah. But no, finishing it is definitely a good feeling.
Yeah.
No, that one is somewhat similar in that it's a female police detective, Annalisa Vega, in Chicago. But it's got a slightly different dual narrative. Basically, this woman, Grace Harper, who's part of an amateur sleuth group called the Gravediggers, they take on cold cases and try and use their combined brain power to solve them. And they've had some nice gets. But Grace, who was a grocery store manager, decides she's going to unearth the Lovelorn killer, who was this serial killer who was active 20 years ago and killed 7 women and then disappeared. Like he just stopped. And so there's always this question, like, what happened to him? Did he go away? Did he die? Is he somewhere else? Like, why did he stop if he stopped? And she's like, I'm going to go get him. Like, I think I can find him. And the book basically opens because he would ritually bind the women and leave them on the floor of their own home.
Is this a little like Golden State Killer? Was that some inspiration? Yeah.
And then he would pen them love letters in the papers.
Oh, that's creepy.
Yeah. That's how he got his Lovelorn nickname.
Oh.
Have you ever worried to a little too cozy?
I'm sorry?
I say, have you ever worried your books are a little too cozy?
Yeah, a little cozy. Yeah. But so Annalisa, her dad was a cop back when the serial killer was active. He's retired now. He has Parkinson's. she's a cop, relatively new one, new detective. But at the time she was a teenager, and her boyfriend was the guy who lived a couple doors down, and his dad was a cop at one point and rode with Ellery's father, and the two families were very involved with one another. They had backyard barbecues and whatever. Anyway, her boyfriend's mom was the seventh victim. And that caused the boyfriend to go away. Like, he was shipped off to relatives, and it was all very tragic. And the dad, Ellery's dad, was very unhappy that he couldn't solve this case. Anyway, it always felt to Ellery that this was a thing that settled like a dark cloud over her family. Excuse me, Annalisa, not Ellery. And so he's talking about Ellery. I have to get used to talking about Annalisa. She's a much lighter character than Ellery at the beginning. She's like on a date when this opens, looking for Mr. Right. But she gets called to the scene of a murder, and it's Grace Harper, who's found dead on the floor of her bedroom, tied up.
Wow.
And so then the question becomes, did she in fact find the guy and he murdered her? Or did somebody in her life use her weird hobby to shut her up or murder her? And she has a journal that she's been keeping all this time that she's going to use to write a book about solving this case. And so the chapters are largely Annalisa, but periodically you hear from Grace and her efforts to track down the killer. So basically the book is these two intersecting points where Grace is pursuing the killer at one level, and we know how that ends, but we watch her as she works through it and how she figures out who it is. And then Annalisa, who works at it from the other end, and how they eventually come together.
That's fascinating. I'm really excited about that one.
It's fun. It has, I think, my two favorite reveals ever. Definitely one of them. But it's darker than anything that I've written for Reed and Ellery. My mom should definitely not read it. So we'll see. It'll be interesting to see how people, like readers, respond to that.
That sounds really, really good, though. Do you watch or do you listen to any like true crime podcasts or anything, or is it more you just kind of more enjoy the fictional like mysteries?
No, I consume a fair amount of true crime.
Me too.
But, not so many podcasts, but I've read a lot of books. I watched a lot of documentaries, some of the ID discovery stuff. I can tell my husband's on the call here. I can tell my favorite story. Yes, as he says, I'm her husband. I've already asked her all my questions. That's not true. He still asks me all the time. But my favorite moment ever was we were watching a Forensic Files in bed one night, and it was about a woman who was an aspiring mystery author, and the police suspected she'd murdered her husband. And they got suspicious when they came to the home. They found him dead, and they looked at her bookshelf, and it was a whole bunch of like Murder 101, crime scene forensics, poisons in you, all this kind of stuff. And so the camera's panning over her bookshelf about, this is why the cops think she did her husband in, because look at all these books. And my husband's lying there next to me. He goes, "You have every one of those."
Yeah. I mean, I can relate to that in that one of my friends got me for my birthday this very gory book of I'm in her apartment right now too, so hopefully she'll not hear this. But she got me this very gory coffee table book of like crime scene photos, and I was like, this is too far even for me. But I was kind of like, what do people think that I'm so interested in? But it's really funny because I go between, usually I'm reading actually romance. That's what I was doing when I was at Macmillan. And then I go between romance and like true crime. So definitely the two different polar opposite sides of literature, I guess you could say.
Yeah. No, I don't think you're alone though.
You just need a palate cleanser, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Edgy crime with a relationship.
Exactly.
I mean, that's the other thing is Reed and Ellery, they're forming this will they or won't they actually have a romantic relationship. And there are a fair number of readers who are like, that's creepy. And I kind of like it because they're not entirely wrong.
Right. Well, I mean, yeah, and a lot of the TV relationships that I love, I would never endorse in real life necessarily if they're codependent or really unhealthy or toxic, but it makes fiction more fun. I mean,
Exactly.
you don't need reality.
There's some reality like you can't put in fiction. The one that I always my go-to is there was a serial killer in Massachusetts years and years ago, and the cops had a suspect, and it was actually the guy, but they didn't know that for sure. They went to his home, his apartment, they knocked on the door, he wasn't there, so they left a note. We want to talk to you, the cops, please call.
Oh my God.
And so he came home, saw the note, and moved to Pennsylvania. And the Massachusetts cops, they never followed up. They're just like, they're like, oh yeah, he wasn't home, so I guess whatever, moving on. And so the guy moved to Pennsylvania and resumed killing there. And eventually the Pennsylvania cops got him. And at that point, they were able to tie him to the Massachusetts murders. But the idea that the cops just would drop it when the guy wasn't home, like you can't put that in a book. Nobody would believe you.
Right.
That this happened. My other thing, like the murder that is this one is loosely based on, I've had some people be like, there's no way they wouldn't have solved this. Like some of my readers have been like, the cops definitely would have solved this crime at some point during these 40 years. I'm like, well, the case that it's based on, when the woman was murdered initially, her dad told the cops who did it.
Whoa.
And the cops just didn't believe him.
Right.
And so nobody followed up for decades until they ran the DNA, and it came back female, and they were like, oh,
that is terrible.
Yeah.
I've been listening to some of the podcasts that are a little bit more focused on like criminal justice and kind of the issues in it. And there's this one called In the Dark that every season has like a different case that was just completely bungled by the cops. And I was actually raised by 4 cops: my mom, my dad, my stepmother, and my stepfather.
That's a lot of cops.
It's a lot of cops. And so I'm biased in that way toward thinking that most cops are in it for the right reasons and they want to do a good job. But yeah, and I think that's true. But there definitely is, I mean, as the news has shown over the last several years, such a culture problem, such a training problem. And anyway, but listening to podcasts like In the Dark that show you how, especially these cops in small communities where they don't have experience with homicides, how they just completely do the wrong things, or probably someone made a mistake and they try to cover it up, and that just makes it all even worse. I mean, it's definitely disheartening to see that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, I think in the case of Sherry Rasmussen, the woman who murdered her was a cop and knew how to fake fencing.
Right. Yeah.
And the cops came, they thought it was a burglary, and there'd been burglaries in the neighborhood. And so they got this tunnel vision right away.
Yeah.
It had to be, so they were on the lookout for this burglar. And that's all they saw.
Yeah.
So when the dad called and said, no, it's this cop that hated her because she married the man that this cop wanted to marry, they were like, no, a cop? No. And what? No, it's a burglar.
Right.
It didn't fit their theory, so they just ignored it.
Yeah, that's what it is. If it doesn't fit the theory, then it's a very rare cop that seems to be like, pushing and going against the brass and everything else. So
especially when it's another cop.
Yeah. Right. The brotherhood. So
yeah. But so some things you can put in, and other things feel like, well, that would just never happen that way. And, well, it did, but nobody would believe it if it's fiction.
Right. That's wild.
So let's finish up by telling us what books are out and when we can expect the next ones.
So the first 3 are out: The Vanishing Season, No Mercy, and All the Best Lies. And the 4th one in the series, Every Waking Hour, comes out next January.
Next January.
Ooh, that's not bad.
Which is unrelated. is gone for good, and that should be available like a year from now, basically. Ish.
That's exciting.
And then number 5 in 2022.
2022, yeah, assuming I get it done, yeah.
That's a pretty good pace. That's very exciting.
Yeah, it's fun. I definitely didn't think I'd have 7 books done in like 5 years.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
Yeah. Joanna, thank you so much. And Heather, thank you for asking such wonderful questions.
Thank you guys so much. This was really a lot of fun, and I hope you all have a great night. Thank you so much.
You too.
You
Thanks
take
so much.
care.
You too. Bye.
Stay safe,
Bye. Thank you,
everybody.
Sarah.
Bye-bye.